Welcome to this explainer, everyone. Today, we're diving straight into the highly publicized and honestly deeply disturbing preliminary hearing of 21-year-old singer Mark David, who is currently facing murder charges in the death of 13-year-old Celeste Rivas. We're going to unpack the really fascinating legal battle lines being drawn right now, using the actual arguments and evidence presented in the courtroom.
So, right off the bat, let's hit the main issue, the defining question of this entire trial, really. Do prosecutors actually need a definitive cause of death to secure a murder conviction? I mean, most of us naturally assume that to prove a murder, you have to prove exactly how the murder happened, right? But as we start looking through the evidence, we're going to see that the letter of the law and actual courtroom realities can often be two very, very different things.
You know, there's a quote from the proceedings that just perfectly captures the central tension of this case. On one side, the prosecution has this mountain of circumstantial, gruesome evidence, showing an undeniable cover-up. But on the flip side, there is a glaring lack of forensic certainty about the actual moment of death. We're literally looking at a masterclass in prosecutorial narrative versus defense forensics.
All right, let's move into Section 1, the suspect and the motive.
The sheer scale of the money involved here is staggering. We're talking about Mark David's highly lucrative music contract with Interscope Records. The prosecution points out that he had upwards of $19 million on the line. In their narrative, this is the ultimate motive. This is the massive treasure chest that the defendant was allegedly desperate to protect at all costs. But getting that money isn't quite as simple as just cutting a check. Enter the Coogan Law. It's a California law designed to protect child entertainers' earnings by holding those funds in a trust. Now, interestingly, because Mark David was 19 at the time, legal experts are heavily debating his immediate access to these funds. Sometimes the trigger to access the money is 18, and sometimes it's delayed until 21. But honestly, whether the money was fully in his pocket or just on the horizon, that kind of potential wealth was undeniably a massive factor in his life. So what exactly was threatening all that wealth? Well, the state alleges that 13-year-old Celeste Rivas actually sent text messages threatening to expose his abuse. The prosecution is meticulously connecting these dots. If this statutory rape came to light, it would mean devastating criminal exposure that would, rightfully, completely destroy David's burgeoning career and his financial future.
Which takes us to Section 2, the prosecution's gruesome strategy.
Look at how the prosecution is laying out the timeline. Days prior to her disappearance, those threatening texts are sent. Then, on the night she vanished, there's evidence suggesting Mark David ordered an Uber to have Celeste brought directly to his house. She's never seen alive again. Fast forward a month, and David is caught on surveillance video parking his Tesla. That car sits completely unmoved for over a month, right up until the horrific discovery of her remains inside. The district attorney literally spent days in the preliminary hearing laying out this deeply disturbing aftermath. They painted this horrific picture of David ordering chainsaws, pieces of a pool found with the dismembered remains, the Tesla just left sitting there, and, incredibly, 11 air fresheners placed inside that vehicle. The strategy here is crystal clear. The DA is trying to absolutely shock the courtroom with a gruesome, undeniable cover-up. They are leading with this horrific narrative before the medical examiner even steps foot on the stand. Now let's look at Section 3, the defense's forensic loophole. What we're watching here is a classic legal chess match. The prosecution relies on a shocking, character-destroying narrative, but the defense, they are being highly clinical. They are pointing to a total lack of scientific proof. They highlight that there is no confirmed cause of death. They're calling the autopsy speculative. And crucially, they point out that despite all the claims about chainsaws, there was absolutely no DNA, no blood, no fluid found on that equipment. The defense is really seizing on the testimony from Deputy Medical Examiner Dr. Grant Ho. When he was asked if the alleged stab wounds occurred before or after death, he could only offer language like possibility, speculative, and maybe could have been. And without medical certainty that the wounds happened while Celeste was alive, the defense argues you simply cannot definitively prove murder. Desecration of a corpse? Yes, absolutely. But murder? The science, they argue, just isn't there. And then there's the timeline of the investigation itself. The autopsy was completed in September of 2025, but the cause of death wasn't determined until December.
Now, the medical examiner stated this was just a standard wait for toxicology results, but that delay, it gives the defense massive room to introduce alternative theories. Like, what if she went to David's house, tragically suffered an accidental drug overdose, and David, panicking about his $19 million contract and the optics of a dead 13-year-old in his home, made the horrific decision to cover it up. That's a terrible cover-up, sure, but it is not murder.
So this brings us right back to our original question. Does a jury have to determine the precise manner of death to convict? Legally speaking, the answer is no. Juries have convicted people of murder when there hasn't even been a body found. But the defense is going to hammer home that the lack of DNA, the speculative autopsy, and this plausible alternative theory of a drug overdose altogether create overwhelming reasonable doubt. Let's move to Section 4, the death penalty debate.
Now, to even put the death penalty on the table in California, the state has to prove what are called special circumstances. And legal commentators are noting that this specific scenario reads exactly like a law school hypothetical for those requirements. If David ordered an Uber to deliver the victim to his house where he was waiting, well, that fulfills lying in wait. And because she was the underage victim of his abuse, she was a witness to a child sex offense. Killing her to silence her fulfills killing a witness. The prosecutorial blueprint for capital punishment is entirely there. But the million-dollar question is, will District Attorney Nathan Hochman actually pursue it? Analysts are fiercely divided on this. On the pro-death penalty side, you have the sheer horror of an adult allegedly slaughtering a 13-year-old girl for financial gain, plus the fact that this case is now in a massive national spotlight. But on the anti-death penalty side, you have to consider the realities of LA County's progressive political climate, the defendant's relatively young age, his lack of prior criminal history, and of course, that glaring lack of forensic certainty regarding the actual death. Some argue that pursuing the ultimate punishment with such weak forensics is just a bridge too far. Which leads us nicely into Section 5, the jury's wild card role. Because at the end of the day, the harsh reality of human emotion is the ultimate wild card. Legal experts point out that even if the defense successfully proved the forensic evidence is incredibly weak, the jury is still going to hear about a 19-year-old exploiting a 13-year-old runaway. They're going to hear about the horrific dismemberment. Evidence of this child abuse might inflame the jury so intensely that they just overlook the medical ambiguity entirely. As one analyst put it, juries do things all the time where they say, I'll fudge on the exact cause of death because I want to get this guy off the streets. And because of this massive emotional undercurrent, the physical optics in the courtroom are being managed incredibly carefully. The judge has already ruled that during the trial, the defendant will wear civilian clothes, likely suits provided by the sheriff's department, and he'll only wear ankle shackles safely hidden from the jury's view under a table. Hand shackles have been completely avoided to ensure he isn't presented to the jury as a monster before the trial even begins. They're really trying to prevent any overly prejudicial visuals. So I want to leave you with this final thought as this whole legal chess match unfolds. The prosecution is yelling, look at this horrific cover-up, while the defense is calmly asking, okay, but where's the science? In the face of such deeply disturbing evidence, will a jury actually demand strict scientific proof of exactly how Celeste Rivas died? Or will absolute emotional outrage secure a murder conviction, regardless of the forensics? It's a question that strikes at the very heart of our justice system. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer. We'll see you next time.